I'm going to be brief. How many of you would like to be smarter anytime you want to be? What I call wiser at will, right? When we're wiser, it usually means that we've learned that what we thought we knew was wrong, doesn't it? Yeah. And so people with great wisdom means that they've had a lot of experience, a lot of mistakes, a lot of failure, a lot of changing of their mind about what they know to be true and what they no longer believe in or think to be true. My work is to accelerate wisdom in anybody, in any team, in any organization. A lot of people, especially with gray hair, like to talk about how long they've been Agile. And Agile before it was called Agile. I started doing team-based organization change in product development organizations in 1985. And I had the pleasure of keynoting the first combined conference of XP Agile Universe in 2004 after the publication of my book, Teamwork is an Individual Skill, which is what I'd learned in a decade of trying to help figure out how to teach software developers and engineers how to build teams. The model that I eventually found and fell in love with that changed my life and has changed my life over and over and over is a very simple model that explains for the first time, probably in history, how personal responsibility works in our minds. So ever since Socrates, gurus have told us that taking 100% personal responsibility is the first key to success in anything, whether it's making money, having a good relationship, creating a lovely garden, building an agile organization, taking 100% personal responsibility, which means something about cause and effect, right? So what all of these gurus hadn't said is they hadn't said how to do it, just that you should. And they tell lots of nice stories, but not really how it works. And so my work, back in trying to figure out how to help software engineers and coders build teams, software project teams, was I realized that when teams come together, what happens is that they experience what I have come to call shared responsibility. And shared responsibility means that they feel a sense of ownership for the thing they're doing together, and they feel a sense of ownership for the relationship with each other. And this change is a change that happens naturally. It happens organically. It doesn't always happen, but it does happen naturally or organically. How many of you have ever been on a really great team? Right? And when it clicked, it just changed the way you felt about the work and about each other, yes? It changed the way you communicated, right? Your communication was much more clear, it was much more consistent, it was much more about the work, it was less about judging and evaluating each other. So there's about 80 years of research on what high-performance teams look like, and the research hasn't changed over and over. So again, the one thing that I was looking for to try and teach people how to understand what happens when teams come together is this notion of shared responsibility. So I went looking to understand, what is this stuff called personal responsibility? And where does it come from? Society, my culture, my parents, my teachers taught me that some people have it and some people don't. And if you want something done, you better go find people that have it and give it to them. But my work as a facilitator or team builder, I found that personal responsibility would emerge when people had an opportunity to participate, to be heard, when they felt safe, when they had an opportunity to engage. So my own experience told me, no, it's not just that some people have it and some people don't. There's an emergent quality to personal responsibility that it shows up at some times and not at other times. So anyway, I was trying to figure out what this stuff is so that I could help figure out how to teach people about it. And I ran into a little research program that was going on, and it was teasing out a pattern in the minds that every one of us uses for processing thoughts about taking and avoiding responsibility for our lives, for our situations, especially for stuff going wrong or stuff we don't like. So this pattern reveals your and my perceptions of cause and effect, of why is this happening to me. What it tells me is that you and I are far more powerful than we usually give ourselves credit for. We like to take credit for the things that happened that we intended to happen, and we don't like to take credit for the things that happened that we don't like, didn't want, aren't enjoying, and don't want to have. We tend to say, I did that. For the good things and for the bad things, we tend to say, that's because of somebody else or something else or the environment or something I can't do about it. What's interesting about this pattern is it turns out that if we are actually willing to start asking ourselves, what was my role in creating this mess, then we actually start learning about how to be more wiser at will when we want to be. It also tells me that leadership is innate. Leadership is in each one of us. And I believe that 95% or more of all leadership is self-leadership. And when you practice responsibility, in other words, when you learn about how this pattern in your mind works, and you start looking at the results you're getting and how maybe you participated in creating those results, then what that does is it's like an internal GPS that helps you learn faster and point you in the direction of better using your genius, your inspiration, and your motivation in what you want to see in the world and what you want to get done. So part of what I'm here today is to help each one of you do a better job of leading yourself to the fulfillment, to the joy, to the freedom, to the power, to the options that you want to experience in the world. So I mentioned again that in the 90s, I did all of this work on trying to figure out how to help build teams. So the work on building teams using this notion of personal responsibility is in this book, Teamwork is an Individual Skill. It wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I finally felt ready or qualified to write the Responsibility Process book. And I understand there may be a few copies around. I'm not exactly sure. So in the few minutes more that I'm going to spend with you, let's make this very practical. What do you want to change? So go ahead. Take 15 seconds. You've already thought of 2 or 3 things. So isolate one. What's one thing you'd like to change in the next week, in the next month? Right? Yeah, hold on to that as we go through this, and let's see what you can apply. I have a great love for what the Agile movement is doing. I actually quit a good job and went back to college to get my graduate degrees in organization science and leadership. And I did it because as I started my career, I looked at this time span of 30, 35, 40 years I was going to be working, and I didn't see happiness. I didn't see fulfillment. And the reason was my role model for going to work was my father, who outwardly was a successful corporate executive. He was a quality control executive in the time when we were ignoring Deming. So you can imagine if he was aware of what was available and his company wasn't hiring it, he probably was an unhappy guy, and he was. So he made plenty of money, kept his family in a nice house, yet he came home every day tired and sore and frustrated and pissed off and had high blood pressure for his whole life that eventually killed him. How many of you know somebody or know a lot of people who have stress-related illnesses from their job, from their career? Right? Yeah. So when I started my work in working on my graduate program, I saw that the big need in our generation, my generation, which is a generation or two ahead of yours, for the most part, the big need was to figure out how can we both have success in business, how can we have productive companies and organizations, and how can we have a life at work? Right? And I've invested my life in trying to figure out how to bring those two things together. And when I saw the Agile movement start, when I didn't find out about it until 2004, because as Kevin explained, it started by software developers. I was more of an organization change guy, so I missed the beginning of it. But when I saw it, it made the most sense to me about bringing these two things together in terms of organizational productivity and people having a life at work. And so what I've done is dedicated myself to the single thing that I think would make the most difference in your life, in the organizational life, in the life of leaders, and bringing those things together. And that is spreading the word about this pattern in our minds called the responsibility process. So let's start here. There's a gigantic difference between being a responsible person and taking 100% responsibility. Being a responsible person means being a good member of society. Being a responsible person means staying in school, staying out of trouble, getting a good degree, getting a good job, becoming part of a family unit, and contributing to society. Yes? Great. Guess what? That's not the same as taking 100% responsibility for your life, for your experience, for your situations. And I'm going to show you where that differs. So here's the way this pattern works. It turns out that this trigger, this pattern in our mind, which I call the responsibility process, it gets triggered every time something goes wrong. Every time something goes wrong, this pattern gets triggered in your mind and my mind. Now, how many times a day do things go wrong? Many. Yeah. For how many of you have 5 or 10 things gone wrong already today? Anybody? Yeah. And what do we have all those emergency meetings about at work? Right? Things going wrong. And if you understand this process, what that means is that people are in mental states that are not states of wisdom. Right? A great deal throughout the day. Now, when I say something going wrong, what I'm referring to is that you and I are creatures of motivation, of inspiration, of dreams, of goals. And so we tend to spend our days going in a direction of something that we want. Right? Maybe it's just getting a cup of coffee. Maybe it's catching the bus. Maybe it's getting to work on time. And so here we are moving towards something that we want. And then what happens, I'm going to shift to this. So here's a force vector in motion, human being going towards getting something that they want. And then you get stopped. Right? The bus is late. Somebody broke the build. Somebody important didn't show up at the team meeting. The budget got cut. You spilled coffee down the front of you. Whatever it is. Right? You're in motion towards something you want. Something stops you. And at that moment, we have a conflict in the mind between what we want and what we have. And you can think of it as force field theory, which says we have driving forces and restraining forces, and when they come together, we have stasis. So interestingly enough, when this happens, we even say, I'm stuck. Right? So we have stasis, but we still have these forces. And so what's happening is there's energy behind each one, which means it produces energy, or it throws off energy, or you can call it heat. But what happens there is what you and I know as anxiety, angst, upset, frustration, annoyance, anger, pissed offness. All right? Do you get what I'm talking about? Yeah. So this happens every time you and I have one of these little things. It's actually a conflict in our mind, which means the definition of it is in our mind, between what we want, what we have at that moment. It creates anxiety. That anxiety gets interpreted by you and me through this pattern of cause and effect. And it turns out that our mind wants to help us cope with the problem. So whenever that happens, it gives us an answer. And the first answer is a lay blame. Right? Now, you've been taught your whole life you shouldn't do this. But my experience is we still do. Right? Even Kevin referred to the culture of blame in his presentation. So, let me give you an example. All right. I'm driving to work. I'm entering my office. I put my key in the door to open the door and go to work, and the door is already unlocked and slightly open. And my first thought, right, is, who forgot to lock my office door? My very first thought. Or I'm working away in the office. Here's a different example. I'm working away in the office, and I have a meeting to go to, and I do one more thing and one more thing, and I finally look at my clock now, I'm going to be late. I grab my keys, and my keys aren't there, and my first thought is, who took my keys? Right? Tell me you don't have these types of thoughts. Anybody? No, I never have those types of thoughts. Right? The thoughts are automatic. They're instant. Right? The issue is whether or not we act on the thought or don't act on the thought. So let me move on from here. So just to kind of reiterate, I'm going to give you some very technical psychology here. Something goes wrong. We have a conflict in our mind between what we want and what we have. This pattern gets triggered, called the responsibility process, and your mind tries to help you cope with it by giving you an immediate answer. That answer is blame. It's his fault or her fault. The issue with blame is that the perception of cause and effect says that you're in the position of effect, it's happening to you, and cause is where? Right? Cause is somewhere else. So we've been told our whole lives by psychologists that this is a victim mentality, that you're giving your power away. What we haven't been told is that it's actually part of your design. It seems to be how you and I are designed to handle crap when we don't know what to do about it right away, when we don't know how to take ownership, when we don't know how to overcome the challenge. It turns out that if we decide to stop blaming, and that's a really good choice, a really good thing to do in terms of wisdom is to catch ourselves blaming, having this thought, and say, you know what, that's a powerless thought. How about if I stop that? Well, then what happens next is that our mind hands us another opportunity to cope with the problem instead of overcome it. And we call this justify. So I reach for my keys, they're not there. I say, who took my keys? And then I realize, I do a little review of since I came to work, and I realize nobody's been in my office since I came to work. Which means nobody would have taken my keys, which means I lost them myself. So my very next thought is this big, long story that I'm telling myself about, well, when I came to work, the door was already open. I thought that, if somebody had forgotten to close it, I came in. The office was a mess, right? I thought we'd been burglarized, papers everywhere, and the window was broken. Oh, wait a minute, no, a branch came down and came through the window, and wind and rain came in and made a mess of all the papers in the office, and an animal came through and did something right there in the plant. Certainly, anybody in this situation would have forgotten where they put their keys. Yes? Yes? Yeah, see, not only do we cope, does our mind help us cope with these problems ourselves, but we're really good at selling them to other people too. All right, I got a bunch of you to, oh, you poor baby. Yes, of course. Anybody as busy and important as you would have forgotten where you put your keys because of all that happening. So, just like blame, the cause-effect perception and justify is that I'm in the position of effect and the cause is out there. And what I've learned is that justify is an extremely powerful, it's a pernicious coping mechanism. We're very, very, very good at it. And we're very good at making up our own stories and believing them. And we're very good at selling them to others. So what are typical justifies? It's the weather. It's the traffic. Did you see that traffic this morning? Right? It's the economy. It's the process. Or how about this one? My number one justify that I deal with in corporate change and leadership work, it's just the way it is around here. Right? It's the way it's always been. That's the way it's always going to be. Now, the way this pattern works is that your mind seems to automatically offer you these stories, but the issue is that then you get to choose whether to believe them or not. And if you believe them and act on them, then you sit in this place called justify, and you go to lunch or you're at the water cooler or the coffee, and you complain over and over and over to the same people about the same cultural issues or leadership or management issues. You might be in justify, which means you might be saying, I'm powerless. I have this problem that I can't solve because I'm in a position of effect, and the cause is out there. What I'm here to tell you is that you don't have to stay in that mental position. If you say, you know what, I'm going to stop telling this story, I'm going to stop making this excuse about it, then what happens is that your mind automatically stops the storytelling, the excuse making, and justifying, and now you start feeling bad. I call this shame, or usually experienced as guilt. And the reason you feel bad is because this sorting mechanism in your mind tried 2 times to make it an external variable, and since you rejected blame and you reject justified, then it says, well, let's switch that external to what? Oh, I did this to myself. Not only am I in the position of effect, I'm also in the position of cause. Ooh, what a dummy I am. How stupid. Geez, I shouldn't have risked that. Will I never learn? Somebody please shoot me now. Right? I'd ask you if you know this self-talk, but I've done the research. I know the answer. Since these mechanisms are designed into us and we were born with these, and then we live in a culture that reinforces them, you and I are all really, really good at all of these things. And probably an important thing to say about that is that I grew up believing that if somebody was blaming or justifying, that they were bad or wrong or ignorant. And what this research teaches me, in terms of compassion and empathy at work, is that I don't blame or justify it because I'm bad or wrong or ignorant or arrogant. I do it because I'm human, and I don't know how to overcome the challenge in front of me right now. And so I'm going with what my mind is wired to do, and then what it's also conditioned to do with how to cope with this. Shame is just lay blame on self, and the reason it's in a different color is because in the red, blame and justify, this is where society tells us that we shouldn't do these things. But now shame is where this pattern starts saying that society says if you're beating yourself up for making a mistake, you're taking responsibility. Right? Think about it. Go to an after-action review and somebody stands up and says, I did that. That was my mistake. I've got big shoulders. I'll take the hit. Blame me. Right? And that's what I would label shame. But we tend to say, oh, good boy, he's taking responsibility. And we also say, I'm off the hook because there's a single point accountability right there. He already admitted to blame. Now, what about that same situation, but somebody different stands up and says, I made that mistake. Oh, man, what a big mistake, too. Now, here's when I caught it. Here's what I did immediately to reverse things. Here's what we've done since to clean it up. Here's what we've done in our team to make sure nobody in the team makes that mistake again. And now I'm standing here to find out what other amends there are for us to make. Now, you tell me, which one is true responsibility? This behavior or this behavior? Point. Which one? All right. Yeah, so I grew up in a society, and you grew up in a society that rewards us when we beat ourselves up for having a problem, making a mistake, getting ourselves into trouble. The issue with that is in the mental state of shame, we're not very wise. We're not making good decisions. We're totally focused on answering the question, what's wrong with me? And if you ask the question, what's wrong with me, your mind will answer. Right? It'll give you lots of answers. Right? You were born in the wrong neighborhood, to the wrong parents, the wrong hair color, right? All the wrong genes, etc. If we decide to stop beating ourselves up because we made a mistake or have a problem, then this coping system continues. And the next thing is that we feel trapped. We feel screwed. We feel like we're in a situation where we have no choice. I call this the mental state of obligation. The mental state of obligation and shame is a multi-trillion-dollar problem in industry that I'm trying to solve. Obligation is also in green because you and I have been taught our whole lives that if we're doing what we're supposed to do, even if we despise it, even if we hate it, even if we don't like it, that we're being responsible people. And what I've learned is that the mental state of obligation is very, very expensive because in the mental state of obligation, your performance is barely adequate to get a pass. Right? So think about it when you go to that really stupid meeting, the stupid meeting that you would only go to because you have to, because you have no choice. Right? How brilliant are you? How present are you? How in the now are you? You're not. The only way to get through that meeting is to hide, right? So it turns out that until we refuse to feel trapped, until we refuse to feel like we have to be somebody we don't want to be, we have to do something we don't want to do, we have to put up with some situation or result that we don't want to have to put up with, until we decide that we don't want to do that, can we get to the mental state of responsibility. So these are all just mental states, and each one of these states has its own cause-effect logic. And in the mental states below the line, the cause-effect logic is very simplistic, even stupid, very unwise. In the mental state of responsibility, it seems like we have access to our complete, complex, adaptive reasoning abilities. In the mental state of responsibility, we feel very free. We feel very self-empowered or powerful. We feel like we have lots of choices. And what's interesting is this mental state is available to us all the time, if we just get ourselves out of these other mental states. In the mental state of responsibility, we can overcome any problem, any obstacle, any challenge. Right? It's a place where we gain much growth, we gain much wisdom. And my invitation for you, if you aren't aware of this and haven't invested any time or energy in starting to think about it and learning it and applying it to your life, is for you to start developing your own practice of discovering yourself in these lower states and figuring out how to get yourself to the mental state of responsibility. I'm going to move along. So some examples. About a year after Judith Mills started studying with me, I just asked her how it was going in her Agile coaching work. And she sent me an email that said this: thanks to the responsibility process, over the last year, 350 people in 9 countries have become way more productive than we ever imagined they could be. Today, we produce twice the software with half the headcount. If I do the math right, that's a 4x improvement in a year. And she says it was primarily because of widespread understanding and adoption of the responsibility process, which means we learned how to get off of these less wise coping mental states and moving to the place of responsibility much faster, where we're much more powerful. Andy Schliep in Germany, who, by the way, has the first CAL training, Certified Agile Leadership training from the Scrum organization, that's based entirely on the responsibility process. And he says transformation starts from within. Whether we want to improve our own lives, take ownership to lead ourselves, or seek to become a more successful, inspirational leader of others, the responsibility process sets the foundation for lasting change and ongoing growth. Few tools are as profound, elementary, and effective. When I met him, he was a successful, sort of grumpy, not so thrilled with life guy. Today, just a few years later, he's amazingly fulfilled in life and work, and a pleasure to know. In Austria, there's a company that's going gangbusters called Catalysts. They were founded around 2010, 2011 by Christoph Stendel, that's him. And he decided to build the company on 2 primary models. One was the theory of constraints, and the other was the responsibility process. And the responsibility process is their model for self-leadership and culture building. And Catalyst has won so many awards and continues to grow so rapidly that they're worth checking out. So here's what I want you to understand and take away. All of these mental positions are absolutely natural. People are not wrong or stupid when they're behaving this way. What it's a signal for is a signal for they just don't know how to get to a position of ownership or responsibility. They don't know how to get to a place of thinking to overcome this problem, become more wise. So when we're in the states of blame and justify, there are no results. Here's a test. How many of you have spent weeks or months in meetings in your organization around some conflict where the conversation never got above justify? It was all blame and justify from meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and you spent millions of dollars of your organization's money having conversations about blame and justify. Anybody admit to that? Yeah. So here's a simple thing you could do. catch yourself doing that the next time and say, guys, let's stop wasting this money. Right? Let's at least get up to shame and obligation, where we can produce some results that are unsatisfying. And only in responsibility do we produce results both for people and for the business that truly matter. So Einstein famously said, no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. I used to think he was talking about some big, monumental, seismic shift of consciousness on the planet. No, he was talking about me. That when I'm in blame, I'm not going to be able to solve anything. When I'm in justify, I can't solve it. When I'm in shame, I can't solve it. When I'm in obligation, I can't solve it. I have to change my own consciousness. And that's really much of what we're talking about when we talk about the people part, the people movement in Agile, is we're talking about bringing the consciousness of spirit and joy and love and creativity to the workplace and generosity. And that's pretty amazing for me. If you're interested in more, get out your phone and open your browser and take a picture, or just type in leadershipgift.com/guide. And what I'll send you when you do that is I'll send you a resource guide with my top 10 resources for beginning your own practice of accelerating your wisdom at will. And hope you got that one, because it's time for me to move on. So I open by asking you what you will change. Before I leave today to go to the airport, I'd love to hear from some of you that you now feel far more powerful, far more free, far more at choice about making the change that you want to make in this world. Now, before I go, I want to make sure that you get this message. The responsibility process only works when self-applied. So, I do not want you going on break and texting that person you dearly love and say, honey, I now know what's wrong with you. You're stuck in justify. Right? I promise you that labeling honey will backfire. Right? So when people first start learning about this pattern, the responsibility process, it's 10,000 times easier to see it in everybody else than in self. Right? So the to-do here is to not label, not turn it into a weapon, not go, aha, aha, aha. Right? Because they're not wrong or bad, they're just human, doing the best they can with the coping mechanisms that we have, because we can't learn immediately sometimes. And so it starts by self-applying. And that means the answer to any problem is, look at this mess, now what do I want about it? And what do I want? Asking yourself, what do I want, will take you towards the responsibility mental state and help you get more clarity and rise above the coping and start to find a little bit of wisdom. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I look forward to seeing you.